If you've been with us, you know that today is just a continuation of a defense that Stephen has been giving. The defense that Stephen is giving is to a claim that we first went over back at the beginning of July, so bear with me if you forget what it was. And let me give you a quick refresher because it's been a little while. We have 4 charges that are coming up against Stephen. His charges are blaspheming against the law, blaspheming against Moses, blaspheming against God, and blaspheming against the temple. These are the 4 charges that the Sadducees and the false witnesses were bringing against Stephen. So far, in the remarks that we have covered, Stephen has made it fairly clear and covered the charges of blasphemy against God and blasphemy against the law. He has shown he has nothing but the utmost respect for the law, and he, in fact, looks to the law for guidance in his own life, and that he has nothing but a reverence for God. He reveres God wholly and truly. We have still yet to deal with the charges of blasphemy against Moses and blasphemy against the temple, and so we're going to continue on today in verse 23. It says, when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. So he knows that he's an Israelite. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went up to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. The next day, Moses came upon 2 Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, "Men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other?" But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" When Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. And after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. He saw this, and he was amazed at the sight. And as he went over to get a closer look, he heard the Lord say, "I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And I have indeed seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their groaning and have come to set them free. Now come, I will send you back to Egypt." And this is the same Moses that they had rejected with the words, "Who made you ruler and judge?" He was sent to their ruler and deliverer by God himself, and through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. He led them out of Egypt and performed wonders and signs in Egypt and the Red Sea, and for 40 years in the wilderness. This is the Moses who told the Israelites, "God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your own people." He was in the assembly in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai and with our ancestors, and he received living words to pass on to us. So what is this and what does it prove? Right? What is Stephen trying to say here? He's just recounting back to them the story of Moses, but of course they're going to be well versed in this. They know this. They're Jewish, of course they know. Right? If we think we know, well, they really know. Right? Like I said, this is just him recalling the story of Moses, but we need to take note about how he speaks of Moses. You may remember from last week, if you were here with us, in verse 20, which we didn't read today, but we read last week, it said that Stephen actually described Moses as no ordinary child. He recognized that Moses was special from the moment that he was born, that he was destined to do something amazing. God had chosen him. Now remember, one of the charges I laid out before was blasphemy against Moses. And in this address, he's being very clear how he regards Moses. And it is not and the way that he talks about him is not someone who would blaspheme against Moses, but instead he sees that Jesus is the fulfillment of the promise that was displayed through Moses. Can you imagine yourself having such a calling on your life as Moses did? Can you imagine how daunting and how overwhelming that must seem. And I'm sure, like most of us, by the time he was 40 years old, he was probably just growing a little impatient with God. God, you chose me to deliver these people. When is it going to happen? It's been 40 years. So when Moses was 40, he decided he was going to live up to his destiny. Remember, that means 40 years of knowing that he was Hebrew. Unlike the modern take on the Exodus movie where apparently it was a big surprise to him. No, he knew he was Hebrew. He knew he was not Egyptian. And he knew that what his family, his adopted family, was doing to his people was wrong. So at 40, he decided, I'm going to do it. I'm going to free my people. And then I will be remembered. And then I will be the savior of the Hebrews. This is good for us to remember as well. Because when we try to do life in the same manner, when we get impatient with God and we decide we're going to take matters into our own hand, or as people say, I'm going to take life by the horns. Do you know what actually happens to people when they grab a bull by the horns? They tend to get gored, okay? It doesn't go well. That bull weighs over a ton, okay? You're not going to win. And the same thing happens to us when we try and do it without God. When we just decide we're going to do it, and we're going to do it our way, and we're going to be successful, and we're going to make something of ourselves, sometimes we'll have a short-term success, like he did. He got rid of the Egyptian. The Egyptian was no longer bothering this man. Hooray, I saved the day. But it only led to things getting worse and worse. Now let's be clear about this as well. I hear it a lot, especially in Christian circles, mostly not in Jewish circles, but in Christian circles, people will often refer to Moses, because of this act, as a murderer, because he killed the Egyptian. But I want to make sure, I want to ask this, for one, did the guy deserve it? Because the difference between murder and killing is very, very different. See, Stephen doesn't actually condemn the action of Moses here. And we do see that with a lot of characters when they look back and they'll say, look, this person did a bad thing. Yes, they were redeemed by God, but they still did a bad thing. He's not doing that here. And the Jewish tradition doesn't hold him to that account. All we know is that he avenged the Israelite. We don't know what exactly was going on. We don't know the circumstances. But what we do know is that Moses saw an injustice. He saw something wrong in the world. He saw something that wasn't working, something that wasn't going the way that it should, and he was going to make it right. The problem wasn't his motive. He wanted to make things right. He wanted to make it whole. He wanted justice. The problem was he tried to do it in his own flesh. Right? The executioner, to go back to that point about murder, the executioner is not guilty of murder when someone is convicted and then and the sentence is carried out. The problem here is that Moses is not the judge, and yet he is casting judgment. In his pursuit of justice, his pursuit of justice is out of pace with the plan that God has made. Instead, this killing results in even more division in the Hebrew people. And now, fearing for his life, Moses has to flee into the wilderness. And this is a feeling that I'm actually quite familiar with. Not with killing someone and then running away. I want to make that clear. I've never killed anybody. But many of you can probably relate to this. You've probably been in a situation when the world feels like it's falling down around you. When things are just crumbling. When things are falling apart, when something that you did suddenly caused everything to just collapse. And it makes you feel like you just want to run away. It makes you just want to get away as far as you can. I want to just run away. I want to go live in the woods and have a simple life. No one will bother me, and I won't be a nuisance to anyone else. I just want to get away from it all. Many of us can relate to that. We can understand why Moses feels this way. But the problem is, as all of us know, running away from your problems just leaves your problems unsolved. They're still there. Nothing changes. They're still there. His people are still trapped, and no matter what he did, now all he has done is made himself look like a failure. Have you ever failed like that? In a similar manner? Have you ever felt that way? And how did you feel? Examine that in your own heart. Think about it. Feel it. Because it doesn't matter what talents or abilities you have. In that moment, you feel totally and utterly worthless. You could have been the inventor of a cure for cancer, right? And it would have been heralded as one of the greatest discoveries. Oh, look, this person, look what they've done. However, in that moment, it doesn't matter any of the successes in your life. All you feel is the entire weight of your colossal failure. We have this unfortunate tendency as humans to focus solely on those negative things, despite all of the positive things we have going in our lives. It's not really a good thing, but it is a reality. And I think it's important for us to face that reality and not turn away from it. So what happens, it leads to many years in the desert. And while he's out there, right, while Moses is out there in the wilderness, out in Midian, he gets married, he has children, he seems to just move along with his life. Like many of us after a failure, he's just trying to pick up the pieces of his life, and he's just trying to make the most of what he has. I'm not sure when or even if Moses ever lost hope about the calling in his life, but I'm sure many of us can relate to the idea that maybe if that was you, and you felt like God put this great responsibility on you, and then you had this big failure, you're probably like, God's probably just moved on to someone else now. I'm just going to make the best I can. Someone else is going to have to save them now. I'll let God do it. I did wrong. I did the wrong thing. And many of us have heard this, especially from former Christians that have felt like, I can't go back to church because I've done such horrible, horrible things, and my life is all falling apart. And what they don't realize is that, Jesus knows, and he forgives you, and he loves you, and he wants you to come back. It's the prodigal son. But unfortunately, that negativity in our lives can really just run us. Besides, if you look at Moses' life, things didn't seem all that bad by that point, right? He started to make a good little life for him. And by all accounts, if he was a normal person, he was having a pretty good life. He still loved the Lord, and he married into a good family. Remember, he married the daughter of a priest to the Lord out in the wilderness. He had children, and his life seemed to be going well. Then one day, 40 years later, he's 80 now. 80 years old. Can you imagine at 80? I'm not even 40 yet, and I'm already feeling like, man, the call of God gets weightier and weightier every year. 80 years old. While he was watching his sheep, there was a bush, and I think this is funny. We always refer to it as the burning bush. The miracle was it wasn't burning. It was the bush that would not burn. And it was right there. Now, first off, why is this a thing, and why is this miraculous? Number one, it's a thing because that kind of thing, bushes catching on fire out in the Middle East, happens all the time, especially down in that area of the desert. Happens all the time. The conditions are just absolutely ripe for combustion, for things like these little bushes form amazing tinder, and the conditions are usually just absolutely perfect for just all kinds of different things to just cause them to spontaneously combust. So that the combustion isn't the miracle. The miracle is, hey, I've seen this so many times in my 40 years in this place. Why is this one not burning? What is so special? It draws him in. It brings him closer. But then as he gets closer, he gets a request. Can you imagine this? He gets told to take off his sandals, for the place where he's standing is holy ground. Never in my life have I ever questioned why God asked this. Never. So as I was preparing for the message this week, I decided I have to question this. And I asked Rebecca, and I asked a lot of my friends. And what I started to realize is, most of us never question why God asked him to take off his shoes. Why was taking off his shoes so important in this moment? Why? what difference does it make if he's wearing his shoes or not? What changes? And the more people I talked to, the more strange a question it seemed to be that I was asking. Most people are just like, well, yeah, it's obvious. And I'd say, okay, great. What's so obvious? And they're like, well, it's obvious. Right? Because most of us don't think about these things. So, I had to dive in. So why did God, and by the way, there is an answer, why did God ask Moses to remove his shoes? And I'm going to tell you the answer by explaining a story from my life. Well, not my life, my brother's life. See, my brother, he wanted to join the volunteer firefighters in Millbrook. And so he was granted an interview, and he was told, okay, when you're coming to the interview, you need to make sure you bring a number 2 pencil to the interview with you. That was a strange request. What do you mean? I'm going to an interview. You're going to ask me questions. Why do I need a pencil? Doesn't matter. That's what he was asked to do. The request seemed really odd, but he showed up that day. He arrived, and the very first thing that the fire chief asked was, okay, do you have your pencil? Brother's like, yeah, and he pulls out of his pocket, shows, yeah, here's my pencil. Very good. And he puts it down, and then they continued on with the interview. My brother had passed the test. When he had there were many people who showed up that day. They maybe showed up with a pen. They maybe didn't show up with anything at all, and they were rejected. So why was bringing a pencil so important? Because if he wasn't willing to listen to the chief when things were easy, when things were good, when things weren't literally on fire all around them, If you weren't a good listener then how can I count on you in a high-stress environment? Right? On its face, it doesn't seem like a huge revelation, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. See, God is just asking Moses to go through a very similar test. Do you need to remove your shoes for God to use you? No. In fact, most of us, let's be really clear about this. There are 2 occasions in the Bible where they are asked to remove their shoes. One is Moses, one is Joshua. That's it. It's not, and how many people are serving the Lord all through the Bible? It's not about your shoes. It's about, are you willing to listen? Are you willing to obey? Are you willing to put trust in the Lord even when you don't necessarily understand what's going on? Because guess what? This is an easy task. Life is good for you. Life is doing well. Things are fine. But guess what? I'm about to put you through a really high-stress environment there, Moses. And if you can't listen to me now, then I might as well look for somebody else. Right? He needs you to be willing to trust him, have faith, show that you're willing to follow. Life is going to get hard. And so Moses obeys, or at least he's that obedient. And then God says something amazing in response after Moses takes off his shoes. And I don't know if we ever properly think about how substantial this is. He says, I have indeed seen the oppression of my people. His people. God claims these people as his. They are his people. He is a part of them. Right? They are not as a possession. They are someone that he identifies with. And he is saying that it is God, not man, that will overcome Egypt. Think about it. How significant that statement is. God doesn't see him as apart from us, but as a part with us. Friends, if that's not significant, I don't know what is. Like, think about it. The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the God of the universe, who simply spoke and nothing became everything, wants to be with us. The next 40 years are summarized nicely in verse 36 because Stephen wants to get to his most important point of all. And that's that what Moses did and said. He said that there was a prophecy that one like Moses would be born, again, from the Jews, a messianic figure who would lead them to the kingdom of heaven. Of course, who's he talking about? And he's going to make it very clear in the next section. He's talking about Jesus. He's saying, I'm not dismissing Moses. In fact, I look to Moses as my witness, as my evidence that Jesus Christ is Lord, that he is the one that Moses spoke of so long ago. I look to Moses, I hold Moses up as my witness that Jesus Christ is Lord, that all signs point back to Jesus. And praise God, Jesus is doing the exact same thing today for us that he did for Moses all those years ago. Right? When we try to do things in our own strength, the success may seem like it's okay in the short term, but eventually things will fall apart. The only way to get it right, the only way to put a society back together, the only way that we're going to see things become good again is if we trust the Lord, if we trust his path, trust his timing, trust him even when we don't necessarily understand why. Right? We still need to verify. Remember, I don't want to say this is a blind trust. It's not blind trust. We can verify. We can look at Scripture and say, is this the kind of thing that the Lord would ask? Yeah, it is. Well, I don't necessarily understand why, God, but I'm going to trust you right now. Because do you think do you think Moses at 80 years old was really ready for the kind of adventure that he was just being called to? 80 years old. He was called to go stand before the most powerful man in the world and demand the release of his entire workforce. And we have hard times getting people wanting to work to 67. See, the only way to get it right, the only way that we're going to have it all put together, the only way we're going to see long-term success is if we trust God. And sometimes that's going to mean a real leap of faith. Sometimes it means we're going to be asked to do some scary things. Sometimes but it's about trusting him, trusting his timing. And it's not that important that you understand right away. Just like my brother didn't understand when he was asked to bring a pencil. Sometimes we just need to trust in the Lord, and you will see that he is, in fact, someone worth trusting.